Today I'll delve into a chilling film known as The Exorcist. But beware, for spoilers lie ahead. Take heed and brace yourself. The story begins in Iraq, where a seasoned Catholic priest by the name of Father Marin becomes part of an archaeological expedition. It's here that he stumbles upon a small, ancient sculpture, a discovery that leaves him deeply perturbed. As if under a sinister spell, he feels an eerie disconnect from the world around him. The universe seems to conspire against him, with ominous signs appearing as he navigates the city. Antique clocks cease their ticking in his presence, and he narrowly escapes being struck by a horse-drawn carriage. Haunted by a sense of dread, Father Marin returns to the archaeological site, where a malevolent statue of a demon stands as the source of the unsettling sculpture he uncovered. Meanwhile, in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., actress Chris McNeil is engrossed in her script when an unsettling noise piques her curiosity. She ventures out of her bedroom, following the disconcerting sounds of crashes and growls that seem to reverberate through her home. Chris checks on her daughter, Regan, who is sleeping with an open window that allows the cold night air to invade. She tenderly closes the window and tucks her daughter beneath the warmth of a blanket. The next morning, Chris summons her housekeepers, Willie and Carl, to set traps in the attic, suspecting a rat infestation. Later that day, Chris is on the set of her latest movie, Crash Course, where she vents her frustrations about the script to the director, Burke Dennings, who soothes her concerns. In the film, Chris portrays a passionate teacher fighting to save her school from demolition. After a long day of filming, Chris strolls back to her residence, savoring the sights and sounds of her neighborhood. Along the way, she passes a church where two priests engage in a poignant conversation about feeling lost. Chris finally arrives home and learns of an invitation to a White House dinner from her assistant, Sharon. Her daughter, Regan, joyfully greets her and excitedly recounts her adventures riding a gray horse borrowed from a man by the river. Mother and daughter share a playful moment, running around the house, their laughter filling the air. Meanwhile, one of the priests, Father Damien Karras, is troubled by a beggar's request for a donation in the subway. He visits his frail, elderly mother, who is delighted to see him. Despite her fragile state and Damien's concerns, she adamantly refuses to leave her apartment for a nursing home, leaving him with money and a tender kiss on her forehead. Back at the McNeil home, Regan presents her mother with a homemade chicken sculpture. While rummaging in the basement, Chris stumbles upon a Ouija board, which Regan claims to have used before. As Chris is about to touch the board, the planchette mysteriously moves away. Suspecting Regan's hand in this, Chris questions her, but the girl insists that a presence named Captain Howdy answers questions on the Ouija board. Later that evening, Chris takes away a tabloid magazine featuring their photo on the cover from Regan. Chris suggests sightseeing in Washington for Regan's upcoming birthday, prompting teasing from the girl about Chris marrying Burke. Chris is quick to clarify that they are just friends. At a bar, Damien shares drinks with Father Tom, the president of Georgetown University. Damien expresses his desire to spend more time with his mother and potentially be reassigned from his current responsibilities. However, given his unique role as both a priest and a psychiatrist, Tom deems him indispensable in his current position and denies his request. Struggling with his faith and feeling ill-suited for his role, Damien questions his own worth. On Regan's birthday, Chris is furious as her ex-husband refuses to answer her calls to speak with their daughter. Regan overhears her mother arguing with the telephone operator and is disappointed with how her birthday is unfolding. That evening, Chris is awakened by a phone call summoning her to work. She discovers Regan in her bed, claiming that her bed was shaking, preventing her from sleeping. Chris leaves the room and once again hears noises emanating from the attic. Armed with only a candlestick, she investigates, searching every nook and cranny until she stumbles upon a closed mousetrap with no rodent in sight. Suddenly, the candle's flame roars before extinguishing itself. Carl appears at the attic door, reassuring her that there are no rats present. On a different morning, a priest brings flowers to the altar of the university church and is startled to find the statue of Mary crudely vandalized. On another day, Regan undergoes various medical examinations, during which she experiences an ominous vision. She becomes increasingly aggressive toward the doctors and enters a trance-like state while humming. The doctor diagnoses Regan with a nerve disorder, considering it a normal part of her development. He suggests that her depression, stemming from her estranged father, may be contributing to her condition. Chris is alarmed when the doctor mentions that Regan used offensive language during the examination, something she had never done before. The doctor recommends administering stimulants to combat her depression. Meanwhile, Damien's mother is admitted to a psychiatric facility by her brother. As they wait, Damien's uncle remarks on how Damien could have been wealthy had he chosen psychiatry over priesthood. Patients in the facility cling to Damien upon recognizing him as a priest. When his mother sees him, she breaks down in tears, convinced that he has abandoned her. Damien promises to take her home, but she remains obstinate. Back at the McNeil residence, Chris hosts a dinner party, filling her home with elegantly dressed guests. During the gathering, Chris learns about Father Damien, who also serves as a psychiatric counselor at the university. According to his colleague, Father Joseph, Damien's mother passed away just days ago. A quarrel erupts in the kitchen between Burke and Carl after the director makes racially insensitive comments. Chris escorts the inebriated Burke out of the house, leaving the party to continue. Guests assemble around the piano, where Regan joins them and makes an ominous prediction to a man before urinating on the carpet. Chris quickly whisks her away, giving her a bath and expressing deep concern for her child. After tucking Regan into bed, Chris descends the stairs but is jolted by the sound of Regan screaming from her bedroom. Rushing to her daughter's side, Chris discovers the bed violently shaking on its own. One evening, Father Joseph brings Damien a drink, and they engage in a conversation about Damien's guilt over his mother's death. While Damien sleeps, he experiences visions of Father Marin's traumatic experiences in Iraq and a distressing encounter with his mother calling out to him. An eerie, demonic face briefly fills his vision as he rushes towards his mother, who heads down into the subway, beyond his reach. In the following days, Chris seeks help from multiple physicians, all of whom suspect a neurological disorder as the cause of Regan's convulsions, hallucinations, and personality changes. Yet brain scans reveal no lesions, leaving them at an impasse. Desperate for answers, they rush to their home, where Regan convulses violently in her bed, screaming for help. Her eyes turn white, and she emits a monstrous growl, striking one of the doctors. With a demonic voice, she spews obscenities and inflicts harm upon herself. The doctors restrain her and administer a sedative, while Chris's agonized cries fill the air. With no medical explanation in sight, they finally turn to a psychiatrist for help. When Chris returns home from the hospital, she notices the lights flickering and briefly sees a demonic face behind her, although she remains unaware of this fleeting apparition. She finds Regan's bedroom window open, causing the room to be chilled. Chris covers her daughter with blankets before setting out to find Sharon. Downstairs, Sharon claims that Burke visited and was supposed to look after Regan while she went to buy medicine, but Burke is nowhere to be found. The doorbell rings, and their co-worker, Chuck, informs them that Burke has died after accidentally falling down the steps behind the university adjacent to their house. Devastated by this news, Chris rushes upstairs to check on Regan, only to find her daughter crawling down the stairs on all fours, blood dripping from her mouth. Days later, a psychiatrist puts Regan under hypnosis, during which she confesses to having someone inside her and fears it. The psychiatrist addresses this entity directly, asking it to come forward. A photo of Regan falls from the fireplace as she begins growling. When asked for its identity, her face contorts in anger. She attacks the man, grabbing him between the legs and wrestles him until she is forcibly removed. While jogging on the university grounds, Damien is approached by Lieutenant Kinderman, who is investigating Burke's death. Unbeknownst to the public, Burke was found with his head twisted backward, and given this detail along with the recent church desecration, Kinderman suspects involvement with witchcraft or someone who believes in it. He inquires whether any of Damien's patients could be responsible, but Damien denies any connection. Meanwhile, Regan is taken to a psychiatric facility for observation, where doctors presume she is suffering from delusions of possession. Chris vehemently opposes institutionalizing her daughter, leaving the doctors with no choice but to recommend an exorcism as a means of convincing Regan that the spirit inside her has been vanquished. At the university, Kinderman conducts an investigation at the steps where Burke met his demise. There, he discovers an enigmatic sculpture hidden beneath the grass at the base of the stairs. As he ascends, he spots Regan's window nearby. After bringing Regan back home, Chris finds a crucifix under her pillow. She questions Carl, Willis, and Sharon about it, but they deny placing it there. As Kinderman questions Chris about Burke's death, she is interrupted by another inexplicable occurrence in her home. Regan's room grows frigid, and Sharon unbuttons the girl's shirt to reveal a scar on her abdomen spelling out the word, "Help me." Damien, still skeptical, continues to investigate, finding Regan's clay sculptures that bear a striking resemblance to the mysterious sculpture discovered by Kinderman. Kinderman departs, and Chris is consumed by distress, contemplating whether her daughter might have been involved in Burke's death. A loud crash from above shatters her thoughts, followed by Regan protesting in a demonic voice. Chris rushes to her daughter's bedroom, finding objects flying around the room. Regan sits on the bed, screaming in a demonic voice as she stabs herself with a crucifix. Chris tries to pry it from her hands but is overpowered and thrown against the wall. Sharon and the others attempt to assist, but the door shuts on its own. Chris barely escapes a massive cabinet that hurtles toward her. She watches in anguish as her daughter's head twists backward. Driven to the brink, Chris reaches out to Damien, beseeching him to perform an exorcism on her daughter. Damien, now a devout psychiatrist, has abandoned belief in exorcism and suggests a psychiatric evaluation for Regan instead. Chris, exhausted by the medical approach, pleads with him. Eventually, she convinces Damien, who remains hesitant due to the difficulty of securing church approval for an exorcism. Together, Chris and Damien return to the McNeil residence to find Regan in a pitiable state. Most of the furniture has been removed from her room, and the bed is cushioned with foam to prevent her from harming herself. The malevolent voice inside Regan claims to be the devil, taunting Damien with guilt over his mother's death. Damien challenges the entity by asking for his mother's maiden name, but instead of a response, the demon spews green fluid onto his face. Later, Damien sits by Regan's side, dabbing a cloth on her fevered forehead. The demon, feigning Damien's mother's voice, pleads for release, attempting to weaken his resolve. However, Damien remains steadfast, checking the girl's feeble pulse. The demon continues to impersonate his mother, causing Damien to mourn deeply. Seizing on Damien's vulnerability, Marin decides to proceed with the exorcism on his own. Downstairs, Chris finds Damien and inquires about Regan's fate. Damien assures her that Regan will survive. Determined to save her daughter, Chris takes Damien to Regan's room, where they find the girl, weakened and in distress, strapped to the bed. The presence within Regan claims to be the devil and taunts Marin, who struggles to breathe due to his deteriorating health. Damien becomes enraged, prompting the demon to wrestle with him. It demands to take him instead. In the ensuing struggle, the demon removes a medallion from Damien's neck, causing Regan's demonic roars to revert to cries of distress. Damien, his eyes turned green as a sign of possession, is forcibly ejected from the window, falling down the same steps where Burke met his end. Chris and Kinderman rush into the bedroom, where they find Regan crying in terror. Kinderman investigates outside the window and sees a crowd of students gathering around Damien's lifeless body. Chris, still grappling with disbelief, realizes that her daughter has returned to her normal self and hugs her tightly. Meanwhile, Damien's friend, Father Joseph, discovers him struggling for life. Joseph administers the last rites as Damien succumbs to death. A few days later, Chris prepares to leave her home. Sharon decides to stay behind and resigns as Chris's assistant, leaving Chris a medallion she found in Regan's old room. Father Joseph approaches Chris and informs her that Regan remembers nothing of her possession. Regan exits the house, her face marked with bruises, but otherwise back to her old self. A clerical collar triggers a distant memory in Regan, and she kisses the priest on the cheek before leaving. As the family drives away, Chris stops the car to offer Damien's medallion to Father Joseph, who insists they keep it. The car departs, leaving the old McNeil house behind. Joseph and Kinderman walk away together, leaving behind the harrowing events that forever changed their lives.